Picture a country that doesn't exist anymore, not destroyed, dissolved, absorbed, erased so completely that the maps had to be reprinted overnight. Now fill that country with 11 million people who woke up one morning and discovered that everything they'd been told their whole lives was, depending on who you ask, either a noble experiment or the longest lie ever told. Add the smell of brown coal burning at 4 a.m, add prefabricated concrete apartment blocks stretching to the horizon like grey teeth. Add a factory siren so loud it reaches into your chest and rearranges something. And add the particular sound, and this is a real sound, you can find recordings of it, of a stamp coming down on a piece of paper in a government office, a sound that decided everything. That's the German Democratic Republic, the GDR East Germany. A country that was smaller than the state of Montana, shared a border with West Germany that you were not allowed to cross, and ran, according to its own government, a workers' paradise. A place where unemployment didn't exist because everyone had a job, where crime didn't exist because the newspapers didn't report it, where hunger didn't exist because the ration system made sure everyone got the same amount of not quite enough. A place where you could spend your whole life inside one factory, inside one city, inside one idea of what human life was supposed to look like. And if that life didn't fit you, well, there was a form for that, the Ausreisentrag, the exit application, and filing it was the bravest and the most dangerous thing most ordinary people in that country ever did. We're going back there tonight, not to the Berlin Wall, not to the Stasi headquarters, or the spy swap bridges, or the stories you already know from the movies. We're going to Karl Marx Stadt, in the south of the Republic, in the autumn of 1974, to a factory that made textile machine parts on a 12-hour shift that began before the sun had any business being up. We're going to live one day. One complete rotation of that shift. Everything you would have seen, smelled, touched with your bare hands, and survived. I make these history stories, and honestly, a lot of you have written to me saying you fall asleep to them, which is everything I've ever wanted from a career. Some of you are probably listening right now with your eyes already half closed, which is exactly right. Some of you are night shift workers yourself, listening while you do something repetitive with your hands, which means you're going to understand this episode in a way that no history book can prepare you for. Either way, get comfortable. Here we go. The alarm clock goes off at 4:45 in the morning. It doesn't ring. It hammers. A thin, hysterical sound, the kind made by a cheap mechanical clock with a bell the size of a thimble, being struck by something determined to ruin you. You've had this clock for 3 years. You know its particular violence. You know the way the sound drills into the last layer of sleep and pins you there, neither awake nor resting, just caught. Your hand finds it without you deciding to move. The silence that follows is so complete it almost hurts. For a moment, just a moment, half a second, you don't remember where you are. There's that brief mercy of total blankness, the half-second between sleep and the world where nothing has happened yet and nothing is required. Then it comes back, not all at once, in pieces. The ceiling first, the particular grey of the ceiling in your apartment in Block 7, Wohngebiet Stadtmitte Nord, Karl Marx Stadt. The water stain in the corner that has been there since you moved in 8 months ago and will be there long after you leave, because the process for reporting a water stain involves 3 separate forms and a wait time that the building manager has described without irony as realistic. Then the cold. The cold finds you next. It has gotten into the blanket somehow. Not through any gap. You've checked, you've tucked the edges. But through the blanket itself, through the thin cotton fill that was perfectly adequate when it was issued 2 years ago, and has been slowly surrendering its warmth molecule by molecule ever since. It's October. The central heating in the block runs on a district schedule, and the district schedule says heating begins in November. It is October 23rd. You have counted the days. Your breath is visible when you exhale, just barely. A ghost, and then nothing. The smell reaches you last. It's layered, the way all real smells are. On top, the coal smoke from the Heitzwerk 2 streets over, which burns brown coal, soft coal, lignite, at a quantity and consistency that coats the inside of your nose with a particular greyness by mid-October and doesn't leave until April. Underneath that, the overnight accumulation of the apartment itself, damp concrete slowly breathing, the faint mineral scent of the thin plaster on the walls, the grease from last night's dinner that has settled into the fabric of everything. Your college Klaus's socks, drying on the radiator that runs off residual warmth and doesn't do much except produce a faint metallic smell of hope. And underneath all of that, underneath everything, the smell of machine oil. That one comes from you. From your skin, from your hands specifically, from the creases of your knuckles and the half moons at the base of your fingernails. You showered yesterday. The oil goes deeper than showering reaches. It has been in your hands, you think, since your 3rd week at the factory. It is simply part of you now. Welcome to Karl-Marx-Stadt, German Democratic Republic. October 1974. Your name is Dieter Krantz. You're 22 years old. You came here from Dubeln, a small town 40 kilometers northwest, with a letter of assignment from the Bezirks Committee, a single suitcase with a broken clasp you've been meaning to fix, and the particular combination of anxiety and resolution that belongs to a young man who has been told his whole life that the state will provide, and has just arrived at the moment of finding out if that's true. You have been here 8 months. You have worked at VEB Werkzeugmaschinenfabrik Karl-Marx-Stadt, the people's own factory for machine tools, Karl-Marx-Stadt, for 7 months and 3 weeks. Every shift is the same. This is not a complaint. This is information. The apartment is a 2-room unit on the 4th floor of a Plattenbau, a slab building, a panel building, a building made from sections of precast concrete that were assembled on site the way a child assembles blocks, except faster, less lovingly, and with considerably more political significance attached. These buildings went up all over the GDR from the 1960s onward, because the leadership had decided that modern socialist housing meant identical, functional, predictable units, where everyone had the same amount of space and nobody had more than anyone else, and the whole thing could be administered sensibly. This is sensible. You've thought about this. You've thought about it in the way you think about things you can't change, with a kind of analytical distance, the way you might examine the mechanics of a machine you haven't been trained to repair. The sensible thing has 2 rooms. One room has a bed, a wardrobe with a door that doesn't quite close, and a small desk with your radio. The other room has a table, 2 chairs, a hot plate, and Klaus. Klaus is your Mitbewohner, your flatmate, assigned by the factory housing office. He is from Halle. He operates a different machine than you on a different shift, which means you see him for approximately 40 minutes per day. 20 minutes when you arrive home and he is eating, and 20 minutes when you are leaving and he is still sleeping. one arm flung over his face with the determination of a man who has learned to sleep in increments. You have been living with Klaus for 8 months. You know that he prefers his bread with lard rather than margarine, that he plays chess against himself on a small magnetic board when he thinks you're asleep, and that he has a photograph inside his wardrobe door. You've seen it once when the door swung open too far, of a woman and a child in a garden somewhere in summer squinting against the sun. You have never asked about them. He has never mentioned them. This is the social compact of the Plattenbau. You know exactly as much about each other as the space requires and not 1 centimetre more. You get up. The floor is cold, not just cool, cold. The linoleum over concrete doesn't lie about its composition. You find your socks by touch in the dark, the thick wool ones you knitted. Well, your mother knitted, and sent in a package with a note that said, "For the factory," as if explaining them to a customs officer. And you pull them on standing up one, foot balanced, which requires more coordination at 4:46 in the morning than you technically have. You dress in the order you always dress. Undershirt, shirt. The thick cotton work shirt with the collar that's slightly too wide, which you bought at the Centrum Warenhaus on Karl Marx Allee, and which fits fine everywhere except the collar, and which you will never exchange because the exchange process involves a receipt you no longer have, and a conversation you don't have the energy for. Work trousers. Heavy, dark blue, the kind that don't so much wear out as gradually achieve a permanent rigidity at the knees and thighs from dried machine oil and accumulated use. Your belt, which is the one personal item you brought from Döbeln that feels entirely like yourself. Brown leather, worn smooth, with a small nick in the third hole from where you once caught it, on a lathe carriage, and the leather screamed a little before it let go. Jacket last. The quilted work jacket, dark grey, with the factory logo above the breast pocket. Sozialistische Einheitspartei Deutschland's flag pin above the logo, slightly crooked. You never straighten it. You should. You've been told you should. You don't know why you don't, except that leaving it slightly crooked feels, in a very small and completely private way, like a choice. Everything you do before 5 in the morning is quiet. Not because Klaus is sleeping. He is. But that's not why. It's because the building itself is quiet, and violating that feels like stepping on something. 80 families in this block. Before 5, they're all in the same half-world between the alarm and the world, doing the same silent negotiation with consciousness. The walls are thin. You hear when you're very quiet yourself the sound of someone else's alarm 2 floors up, the particular creak of a specific stair on the stairwell that belongs to the woman from 2B who leaves earliest, the sound of water moving through pipes as the block begins to wake. You fill the kettle, gas burner, the soft whomp of the ignition. You stand over the flame for a moment, not to watch the water boil, but just to be near the heat. Your hands, in this light, look older than 22. The knuckles are rough. The skin is dry in the way that factory air dries skin, not chapped exactly, but somehow depleted, as if moisture is something that needs to be manufactured there and the supply chain has been disrupted. There's a small scar at the base of your left thumb, a thin white line from 6 weeks ago when a metal chip from the lathe jumped the guard and found you before you could find it. The factory doctor cleaned it and applied a bandage and made a note in the Unfallbuch, the accident book, and told you it would heal cleanly. It has. The scar is barely visible now. By spring you won't see it at all. By spring you'll have new ones. The coffee is not good. You know this, and you make it anyway, because coffee at 4:50 in the morning is not about being good. It's a ritual. It's the step between lying down and standing up, the warm weight of the cup in your hands, the steam rising, the specific combination of warmth and bitterness that tells your body, this is real, this is now, it's starting. The coffee is ersatz mostly, not real coffee, but the GDR version, a blend of actual coffee beans with chicory and grain that was developed in the 1950s, when real coffee was scarce, and has persisted because the blending formula is a state secret, or possibly just because nobody has gotten around to changing it. It tastes, your mother once said when you brought a packet home to Dublin for a visit, like coffee that has met coffee and has strong opinions about it. You drink it standing, you don't sit. You've learned this. If you sit at 5 in the morning, your body decides the day has already made an error in judgment. You rinse the cup, leave it on the edge of the sink at an angle that allows the water to drain, and quietly on the socks alone without shoes yet you go to the window. Karl Marx's Stadt at 5 in the morning in October looks like a sketch of a city that someone hasn't finished filling in. From the 4th floor you can see the street below, empty now, the tram tracks running straight and grey toward the intersection at Karl Marx Allee. Streetlights still on, casting orange pools on the wet pavement. It rained in the night. You can tell by the shine on the cobblestones where the tram tracks cross. Above the nearest block of buildings, the sky is just beginning to separate into 2 shades of dark. One shade with stars, one without. That's the east. That's where the day is coming from eventually. Somewhere out there, in the direction you can't quite see from this window, the factory is already running. The night shift is already on the floor. The machines are already turning. The night shift ends at 6. Your shift starts at 6. There is a half-hour overlap, not for socializing, not for handovers of the kind you might imagine, but because the machines need to keep running, and the swap between shifts happens at the machine, at the workstation, while both workers are present for 5 minutes to confirm continuity of production. The night shift worker shows you where the material count stands. You sign the board. They leave. You're there. The city is so quiet you can hear the tram system warming up, somewhere to the north. Not the trams themselves. They don't run this early, but the infrastructure, the electrical hum in the lines above the empty tracks, a low sustained note, constant, indifferent. You watch a cat cross the street below. It moves with the specific purposefulness of a cat who has already decided where it's going and regards the entire human world as an administrative inconvenience. It disappears into the shadow of the building across the way and doesn't come back. You put your shoes on, lace them, pull your jacket straight, not the pin, and you go out into October. The stairwell smells of mould and someone's boiled cabbage from last night, the two of them combining into something that is particular to Plattenbau stairwells and would be recognizable to anyone who ever lived in one. The ceiling light on the 2nd floor landing has been out for 3 weeks. You feel your way past it by hand on the railing, which is cold metal and slightly sticky with the cold. There is a process for reporting a broken hallway light. You know this. The process involves speaking to the building administrator, who works Tuesday and Thursday mornings, which is when you are at the factory, outside. The cold hits your face like something physical. Not violent cold, not the iron cold of January, but October cold, the kind that has intent. The kind that says, summer is over and I want you to know I'm serious. Your breath comes out in a cloud and drifts sideways on a wind that runs low along the street. picking up a scrap of newspaper near the drain and carrying it a few meters before dropping it against the tire of a Trabant parked at the curb. The Trabant, white, or once white, now the particular yellowish grey that East German white becomes, sits there like a patient, unambitious piece of furniture. Somewhere on this block, 12 families are on the waiting list for a Trabant. The average wait time is 11 years. You're not on the list. You cannot afford the deposit. You turn left. You know this route by muscle now. Your feet know it. Your body knows every change of pavement texture. The smooth, older cobblestones near the Magistral, the rougher poured concrete of the newer section, the slight tilt where the ground has shifted in front of the pharmacy and makes micro-adjustments without consulting your brain. You pass 3 other people. A woman walking fast, hands in her jacket pockets looking at the ground. A man in a factory jacket different from yours. VEB Electrobau, the logo says, who nods at you without making eye contact in the precise way that people who see each other every morning in the dark acknowledge each other, enough to confirm that you are both human and present, not enough to require anything else. A teenager on a bicycle, no lights, the chain making a thin rhythmic clicking sound that Doppler shifts as he passes and fades. The smell of the city at 5 in the morning is brown coal and wet leaves, and the faint permanent background note of industrial lubricant that belongs to any city in the GDR that has factories, which is every city in the GDR. Karl-Marx-Stadt is a factory city. It was a factory city before the war, when it was called Chemnitz, and it was a factory city during the war, which is why the Allied bombers found it useful to visit in 1945, and it has been a factory city since, because the question of what to do with the rubble was answered by building more factories on top of it and naming the city after Karl Marx, who would have had strong opinions about the factories. The city is rebuilding, has been rebuilding, will be rebuilding for years yet. The Magistral, the main boulevard, Karl Marx Allee, is grand in the way the GDR does grand things. Wide, serious, lined with buildings designed to remind you that you are living inside a concept. The concept requires a certain scale. Everything is slightly larger than necessary for one person, slightly smaller than comfortable for a crowd. The sidewalks could fit 8 people across. At 5 in the morning there are 3. At the end of the Magistral you can see the monument, the Karl Marx monument. The Nischel, people call it in the local dialect, the skull. It's a huge bronze head of Karl Marx himself, mounted on a granite pediment about the size of a small house, looking northwest with an expression that might be visionary or might be deeply unimpressed, depending on the light. It was unveiled in 1971, 3 years ago. It weighs 40 tons. It was made in Moscow. The face is 14 meters wide. The inscription on the pediment says, in several languages, "Working men of all countries unite." You walk past it every morning on the way to the factory. It's been there your entire time in this city. You've stopped really seeing it the way you stop seeing the furniture in a room you live in. It's just there, in the category of things that are permanent and definitive, like the water stain on your ceiling. But sometimes at 5 in the morning, in the dark, when the cold is doing that thing where it makes the edges of everything slightly more real, you look up at the Nischel and you think, 40 tons. Someone moved 40 tons of bronze across the border and put it here. And they did it because they believed, or had been told to believe, or had decided it was politically expedient to act as if they believed that this face, this particular man's face, 40 tons of it, would make the workers of Karl-Marx-Stadt feel seen. You don't feel seen. You feel cold. You turn right at the monument. 4 more minutes to the factory gate. The factory announces itself before you see it. Sound first. The low, sustained mechanical conversation of a large industrial facility that never stops. A deep rhythmic thumping from the pressing shop. A high, thin whine from the grinding section. The underneath everything bass note of the power systems running and the exhaust fans on the roof of Building 3, which make a sound like something enormous breathing slowly in the dark. The sounds layer over each other and create a texture that your body has learned to read the way your eyes read the sky. That particular combination of pitch and volume means the night shift has been running without major incident. A different combination. Something off in the rhythm, a gap, a changed note. And you'd know before you reach the gate that something was wrong. Nothing is wrong this morning. The sound is right. Smell arrives with the sound. Warm machine oil, the specific metallic bite of swarf, the tiny curled metal shavings that come off the lathes and milling machines, and the sharp, eye-catching smell of the cutting fluid, the emulsion they spray on the metal to cool it during machining. The cutting fluid has an aquamarine tint when fresh, and turns an unpleasant brownish grey over time, and the smell of it is somewhere between industrial cleaner and something organic that you can't quite place, and it will be in your nostrils for the next 12 hours. Light last. The factory is lit like a counter-argument to darkness. Sodium lamps on tall poles flood the yard in orange. Every window in buildings 1 through 5 is lit. There is a quality to factory light in 1974 that is different from any other light. It doesn't illuminate so much as obliterate, replacing the nuance of natural shadow with a flat, exhaustive brightness that picks out every detail of everything and flatters nothing. The workers are converging on the gate from 3 directions. Maybe 30 of you in the last 5 minutes of the walk funneling toward the Pförtner, the gatekeeper's booth, where Gerald sits every morning with a thermos of coffee, a list, and the particular authority of a man whose job is to control access to the thing everyone has to access. The Betriebsausweis, the factory pass. You have it in your left breast pocket where it always is, where it must always be. A laminated card with your photograph, taken at the factory on your first day, looking slightly uncertain, which is appropriate because you were your name, your personnel number, your section assignment, your clearance level. You show it to Gerald without breaking stride. He looks at it, looks at you, nods once, and you're through. This is a ritual. It has been a ritual every morning for 7 months and 3 weeks. Gerald has seen your face every morning. He knows you. He nods. He still checks the pass. This is correct procedure. This is how it works. You don't resent it. You've stopped resenting it. That's not the same as accepting it exactly. It's more like the way you stop noticing the weight of a coat after you've been wearing it long enough. Through the gate, across the yard. The concrete here is older. The original pre-war surface of the Chemnitz machine works that this factory grew from, cracked in long lines with brown weeds forcing themselves up between slabs, the weeds having decided that ideological commitment to industrial production is not their department, and into the changing room at the east entrance of Building 2. The changing room is warm. This is the first real warmth of the morning, and it hits you with an almost physical relief. The room smells overwhelmingly of men who have just worked 12 hours. The night shift is changing out on the other side, and of the cleaning fluid they use to wash the oil off, a sharp citrus smell that doesn't entirely win the argument with the oil but tries hard. The lockers are painted a shade of green that hasn't existed in nature, a particular institutional green, like a colour that was designed in a room with no windows by people who'd only read about the concept of green. Your locker is number 147, combination padlock, 3 digits, 731, which is your father's birthday in reverse because that was the combination he used on everything, and it was easier to remember than something original. Inside, your work overalls hung on the hook, fresh this week. The replacement pair, stiff at the shoulders from being laundered in the factory laundry, where everything comes back geometrically folded and slightly starched and smelling of the institutional detergent that smells, faintly, of the war, the way all things do that were formulated before 1950 and never updated. You change. The overalls are heavy, thick cotton twill, dark blue, with reinforced knees and doubled elbows, built for a decade of use, and probably already in their second decade. You button them up from the bottom, 8 buttons, the routine exact and automatic. The kind of motion that has moved out of conscious control into the hands themselves. Work gloves in the right-hand pocket, leather-palmed, canvas-backed, already stiff with residue, and your safety glasses hanging on the locker door. You take them, you put them on your head, above your forehead, where they'll stay until you reach the machine. Everyone carries them this way. Everyone knows not to walk onto the shop floor without them. This is Rule 1. Rule 1 is not about safety forms and compliance. Rule 1 is about what happens when a metal chip leaves a workpiece at speed and finds something soft. You have heard what happens. You have met the man in Section 4, Werner, who has heard what happens with both ears and only one eye. You do not take your safety glasses off between the changing room and your workstation. In the corridor outside the changing room, you pass the night shift coming the other way. You know some of them. Nod. Brief exchanges of the 5 a.m. working man's lexicon. Alles gut? Ja, ja. Schickt war gut. Na ja. Bis morgen. A language pared down to pure function, stripped of everything that isn't logistical. You've come to find it almost beautiful. The shop floor opens in front of you, and the sound and the heat arrive together, the way they always do. Building 2 is the turning and milling section. The ceiling is high, 8 meters, and hung with the lighting rigs that make noon at any hour, and with ventilation ducts that do their best against the cutting fluid fumes and the oil smoke and the metal dust, and don't entirely succeed, so there's a permanent slight haze in the upper third of the building that moves in slow curls when the fans run. The floor is concrete, painted red, or once painted red, now the colour of red that has decided to mostly become grey. The floor has been painted red and repainted and painted again since the 1950s, and in the places where the machine bases have cracked it and the paint has chipped, you can see the layers, a thin archaeological section of GDR industrial history in successive coats of floor paint. Your machine is third from the left in the second row. You can see it from the entrance. You've been able to see it from the entrance for 7 months. It occupies a specific space in your perceptual field now, the way your own bed does, the way familiar furniture does. It's a CNC Dre machine, a numerical control lathe, though numerical control in 1974 means something considerably more mechanical than it would later mean. A system of punch tape and relay switches rather than the computer-controlled precision that would come. This one is a German Democratic Republic manufactured machine, built at VB Werkzeugmaschinenfabrik selbst. This factory made, among other things, machines for other factories to use to make other things. The particular recursive circularity of the planned economy. Your lathe makes parts, specifically flanged coupling sleeves, 17 millimeters internal diameter, specified tolerance 0.02 millimeter, to be used in textile machinery of a type manufactured in the Kombinat in Leipzig. You've never seen the textile machinery. You've never been to Leipzig. You've made 8,327 of these coupling sleeves in the past 7 months and 3 weeks, and you know this because the number is tracked daily in the production record that sits in a binder on the section supervisor's desk. The number is tracked because the number matters. The number matters because of the norm. Let me explain the norm. The norm, the Arbeitsnorm, the work norm, is the defined production target for each worker, each machine, each shift. It is how the planned economy translates the abstract machinery of state economics into the concrete fact of your hands at a lathe. The central planning authority decides how many coupling sleeves are needed. The factory engineers calculate how many a competent operator can produce per shift on this type of machine. That number becomes the norm. The norm is posted above the workstation. The norm is checked daily. The norm is compared to actual production, and the comparison produces a percentage, and the percentage determines a significant portion of your wage. 100% of norm means you made exactly what the calculation says a competent worker should make. 120% means you're doing well. 80% means there will be a conversation. The norm for your operation is 92 coupling sleeves per 12-hour shift. 92 coupling sleeves in 12 hours, which is approximately 1 every 7 minutes and 47 seconds, accounting for setup time, machine maintenance intervals, quality checks, and the 3 officially permitted breaks of 20 minutes each. You have met the norm every shift for the past 5 months. You exceeded it 17 times. You have never fallen below it since your 2nd month when you were still learning the setup. This is not bragging. This is information. This is, in 1974 East Germany, a description of what it means to be a functioning member of the workers' collective. Your Meister, your section foreman, Meister Hoffmann, is already at the section when you arrive. He is a compact man in his 50s, Meister Hoffmann, with grey hair cut close and hands that are permanently the colour of the workshop. Grey tan, the skin of someone who has spent 30 years in close contact with metal and cutting fluid and the industrial air. He has a face that is not unkind but is not gentle either. A functional face like a good tool, designed for a specific purpose and optimized for nothing else. Kranz, he says, Meister. That's the greeting. 7 months in, that's the complete and sufficient greeting. You have learned not to read anything into its brevity. Meister Hoffmann greets everyone with exactly this much, and it means something. It means he sees you, registers you as present, has no immediate concern to communicate, which is all a greeting needs to mean at 6 in the morning in a machine shop. The night shift counterpart at your lathe is a man called Rüdiger. You have spoken with Rüdiger for 5 minutes every morning for 7 months, and in those accumulated 35 minutes of conversation, you know that he comes from Zwickau, has a daughter called Petra, takes his coffee without sugar, and believes that the best way to extend the life of the tungsten carbide cutting inserts is to run the coolant flow 2 degrees colder than the specification recommends, which he demonstrated to you on your 2nd week, and which works measurably. That's what you know about Rüdiger. You know the quality of his machining judgment better than you know the sound of his laugh. Night was good, Rüdiger says. He doesn't look up from the logbook. His handwriting is the particular cramped precision of a man who has learned to write in confined spaces and under time pressure. 67 pieces. Had to stop twice. Chuck jaw 3 is starting to wear. I flagged it. Requisitions in. You look at the lathe. The chuck jaws, the three-pronged grip that holds the workpiece while it spins, are critical. A worn jaw means slightly inconsistent grip, which means slightly inconsistent concentricity, which means coupling sleeves that are at the edge of tolerance rather than in the centre of it, parts that pass inspection but barely. How long on the requisition? Rudiger finally looks up. His expression is the one used for the question you both already know the answer to. Filed it Thursday, so 3 weeks, a month. I'll check with Hoffman. I already asked Hoffman. He said file the requisition. A pause. I filed the requisition. This is the shape of life here. A jaw is wearing. The solution, replacement jaw, exists in a warehouse somewhere in the GDR, manufactured and catalogued and theoretically available. The distance between the wearing jaw and the replacement jaw is a requisition process involving a form, a countersignature, an approval from the section head, an order to the central stores, a delivery that depends on the store's own supply chain, which depends on the allocation from the ministry, which depends on the 5-year plan, which was finalised 18 months ago, and does not know about this particular chuck jaw. The jaw will continue to wear. The coupling sleeves will continue to be produced within tolerance, but at the tolerance edge. Eventually the jaw will be replaced, or it won't, and something will break, and then there will be an expedited process, and the jaw will arrive in 2 days. You sign the logbook. Rudiger goes. You're alone with the machine. You put on your gloves. You put on your safety glasses. You take the cutting insert from the tool holder and examine it in the light. A small grey-brown rhombus of tungsten carbide with a sharp edge that catches the sodium light like a diamond. You turn it in your fingers. It has 2 good edges left before it needs rotating. You replace it. You load the first work piece. The blanks, the raw steel cylinders from which the coupling sleeves will be cut, are in a steel tray to your right. Each one is approximately the size of a fat thumb. The steel is a medium carbon alloy, and it has a specific feel in your hands. Dense and cold in the morning, slightly oily from the protective coating applied at the raw material warehouse, with a weight that is slightly more than its size suggests. You will pick up and load and unload several hundred of these today. By the end of the shift, the motion will be invisible to you, automatic, existing in the hands entirely without involvement from the thinking part of the brain. You load the first blank into the chuck. Tighten. Run the program selection. 3 turns of the dial. A switch. The confirmation buzz of the relay. Engage the coolant flow. A thin greenish stream arcs from the nozzle onto the workpiece position, and the smell of the cutting fluid intensifies. Acrid, aqueous. There. Fully there. You lower the tool holder, set the start position by feel and the dial indicator. Check the dial indicator twice. 0.00, confirm, and press the start button. The chuck spins up. The machine sound changes, deepens, becomes purposeful. The tool engages. The first coupling sleeve begins. There's a thing that happens around the 40-minute mark of any repetitive machining operation, and you have never heard it described by anyone who doesn't work a machine. So let me try to describe it. The thinking mind gives up, not in defeat, not in exhaustion. It just steps back, the way a sensible person steps back from a conversation that's going fine without them. The work is happening. The hands know the work. The eyes are tracking the critical points, tool position, chip formation, the dial indicator, the part surface. But they're doing it autonomously, the way eyes track movement without conscious instruction. The brain, finding itself not needed, quiets down. What you get in that quiet is not silence. The factory is never silent. What you get is something like the full texture of the present moment, delivered without commentary. The weight of the blank as you pick it up, the precise resistance of the chuck key as it tightens. You know the exact point of sufficient tightness by feel, a specific number of kilogram centimeters that lives in your wrist now, not your head. The sound the machine makes when the cut is right, a steady hiss and ring as the tool moves through the steel versus when it's slightly wrong, a chatter, a roughness, a hint of shriek that means slow down, something's off. The heat that builds in the machine housing over the first hour, the way the cutting fluid fumes sting your eyes slightly at mid-morning when the shop gets warm enough that the ventilation isn't keeping up, the smell of hot steel. You've learned that this smell is specific. Fresh steel smells like rain on metal, slightly electric, slightly clean, almost pleasant. Hot steel, steel being cut, smells like intent. It's a serious smell. It doesn't allow for distraction. The coupling sleeves come off the machine and go into the finished parts tray on your left. Every seventh piece you pull out and check. Internal diameter with the plug gauge, face perpendicularity with the square, surface finish by eye and touch. The plug gauge goes in, goes out. Go, no go. Every seventh piece. Every seventh piece for 12 hours. By 7:30 in the morning you have made 16 coupling sleeves. By 9 you've made 31. The norm is tracking correctly. You're at 104%. You allow yourself, briefly, the satisfaction of this. It is a small satisfaction. It is completely real. At 9:45, Meister Hoffmann walks through the section and stops at the board near the section door, the production board, updated hourly by the section scribe, a young woman called Ute, who works in the office, and whose job, in part, is to make sure everyone's percentage is visible at all times. The board lists every operator, every machine, current count against daily norm. The number in green means you're on track or above. The number in red means you're not. Everyone looks at the board when they pass. Everyone. This is not surveillance. Well, it is surveillance, but it is also, genuinely, how you know where you stand, and there is something in human nature that wants to know where you stand, even when standing is all you're doing. Your name, Kranz, D. Your machine, RT 23. Current count 34. Daily norm 92. Percentage 110%. Green. You don't see Hoffman's face when he looks at your line on the board. You're at your machine. But you've learned to read the absence of his footsteps coming toward you as a kind of comment. When the board is right, Hoffmann keeps moving. When the board is wrong, the footsteps stop. And then there's a brief specific silence, and then your name. This morning the footsteps keep moving. At the machine next to yours, however, they stop. Your neighbour is Franz. Franz is 34. Has been at this factory since he was 18, and has a particular relationship with the norm that is difficult to characterize as acceptance or resistance. Franz doesn't not make the norm. He makes almost the norm consistently every shift, coming in at 90 to 95% with the regularity of a tide. Not enough to trigger a serious formal conversation, but enough that his line on the board is often the palest green, almost white. "Franz," says Hoffmann. A pause. "You can hear this, under the machine noise if you've been here long enough. Meister, 86%. I had an insert fail at 7, had to reindex. You flagged it? I'm flagging it now." Another pause. Hoffmann is not a shouter, he doesn't threaten. He speaks in the particular tone of a man who has had this conversation 400 times and has developed a professional distance from it, the way a doctor develops professional distance from the thing that was once terrible and is now simply the work. Get to 100 by lunch. We're behind on the weekly and Schaefer will be through at 2. Schaefer is the production director. Schaefer is the reason people use a tone of voice when they say Schaefer will be through at 2 that they do not use for other sentences. "Yes, Meister," Hoffmann moves on. Franz looks at his machine for a moment with an expression that is not readable from where you are, and then his hands start moving. You look back at your own machine. 92 pieces by 6 p.m, 34 done, 58 to go, 7 hours and 20 minutes remaining. This is the arithmetic of the norm. You do not do this calculation consciously. Not anymore. It runs in the background like a machine of its own, a small counter in some part of your mind that tracks constantly, adjusts constantly, tells your hands when to push the pace and when you have margin. You've gotten good at this, better than you expected to get, which suggests something about you that you are still working out the meaning of. The morning pause 20 minutes at 10:15, happens with the mechanical regularity of the shift bell. You don't stop mid-piece. You finish the piece you're on, load the finished part, note the count, and then stop. The break room in Building 2 is a rectangular space with white tiles on the walls to chest height, and above that yellowing cream paint that might once have been properly white. There are 12 plastic-seated chairs in rows, a folding table with a thermos of actual coffee, not ersatz, factory provided on a schedule, actual coffee, and a second thermos of the hot water that has been heated on the principle that people need something, and hot water at least achieves temperature. There is a corkboard with notices. There is a poster, a smiling worker with a wrench over his shoulder, and the slogan "Socialismus siegt," socialism wins, in red letters on a white background. The font bold, the smiling worker depicted in a style that makes him look less like a human being and more like an architectural drawing of optimism. You have looked at that poster every morning break and every afternoon break and every evening break for 7 months. You have thought many things about it privately. You have said none of them. Klaus from 3A section, not your flatmate Klaus, different Klaus. This Klaus is from Dresden. The section makes larger components. Pours himself coffee and drops into the chair next to yours. He's a compact man with careful eyes, and the particular manner of someone who has thought about his own opinions and decided to be selective about where he keeps them. Hoffmann stopped at Franz again, Klaus says, not a question. 86. Franz is making a point. Franz is making 86%. Klaus smiles fractionally. It's the same thing. You drink your coffee. It's good coffee, actually. Factory coffee. Real beans. The first real thing of the morning apart from the cold outside. The warmth moves through your hands from the cup and you let it. Your fingers, even gloved, stiffen in the first hour of machining, and the break is when they come back to themselves. At the other end of the room, 2 of the older workers, men who have been at this factory since the 1950s, who have production photos in the hallway outside the director's office, who are referred to as Aktivisten because they exceeded the norm so consistently for so long that it was made official, are talking in the contained, efficient way of men who have covered the available subjects many times and are now in a maintenance phase of conversation. Enough words to confirm presence, not enough to create new information. One of them, Helmut, served in the Volksmarine before he came to the factory. He has tattoos on his forearms that he keeps covered by his overalls, which everyone knows about and no one mentions. On his annual evaluation, his section head writes, "Reliable, technically excellent, ideologically sound." On the wall of the break room, someone has once written something in pencil in the corner behind the thermos stand. You've seen it. You think everyone has seen it. It says simply, "and then," which has been half erased but not fully, and which no one has reported to the Betriebsschutz, and which everyone walks past every day as if it isn't there. Schaefer's coming at 2, you tell Klaus. Already know. Ute was going around this morning. Clean up detail at noon. He looks at his coffee cup. Every surface that can be seen from the door. All good on your side? On my side. A pause. On Bergman's side, there's that business with the T-22 that's been misfeeding for a week. Bergman's been making count by running extra setups, which is the wrong fix, and everyone knows it, and no one wants to be the one to tell Schaefer that the machine needs a full calibration. How long does a full calibration take? 3 days if parts are in stock. Parts in stock? Klaus looks at you. Right, you say. So Bergman will keep running extra setups and the misfeed will get worse, and eventually something will really break and then it'll be an emergency and parts will arrive in 2 days. This is not cynicism. This is the topology of the system as it actually operates, described with the accuracy of people who live inside it. The planned economy plans the production of coupling sleeves. It does not plan for the chuck jaw that wears 3 weeks earlier than the model predicted. The 5-year plan allocates spare parts on the basis of expected failure rates, which are averages. The chuck jaw that has been failing faster than average is not in the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan is correct. The chuck jaw is incorrect. The brake bell rings. 20 minutes done. You get up, wash your cup in the sink. The water barely warm. Set it upside down on the rack. Back to the floor. Here is the truth about the middle hours of a repetitive shift. The hours from 10:45 to 1:30, when the morning break is done and the lunch break hasn't arrived and the end of the day is so far away it doesn't feel like a real thing yet. These hours are the factory's purest form. All the other parts of the shift have something attached to them. The beginning has the transition from the outside world. The morning break has coffee. The afternoon has the anticipation of completion. The middle hours have nothing. Just the work. Just the machine. Just the piece count advancing toward the norm in increments that are real and trackable and which, if you think about them, will drive you slightly mad. And so you learn not to think about them but to simply be inside the motion of the work itself. The lathe turns, the tool cuts, the coolant flows, the chip breaks away from the workpiece in a curl, sometimes a long, elegant helix when the feed rate and speed are right, sometimes a shorter arc, sometimes a frustrated crumble when the material's a little harder than the batch certificate said, and falls into the chip tray below the cutting zone. Every hour you clear the chip tray with the hook. The chips are sharp, even in a pile. You've learned how to handle them. Your gloves bear the proof of the learning. The smell of the cutting fluid thickens in the middle hours. The ventilation is on, the fans are running, but the shop is warm now and the emulsion hangs in the air around the machines. You stop noticing it, except when you don't, which is irregular. Something shifts in attention, a moment of actually smelling rather than merely registering, and the full chemical organic acridness of 40 cutting machines running on a Wednesday morning in October hits you like walking into a room you've forgotten, and then it's gone again, back into background. Franz, on the machine beside you, is running fast. You can hear it, the slightly higher pitch of his machine, the shortened cycle time, the more frequent sound of the chuck actuating. He's pushing to make up the morning deficit. You don't look over. Franz knows you can hear it. You both know what it means. There's a kind of privacy in the noise, the way people in very small apartments learn not to react to sounds that mean things. At 12:30, a different kind of sound enters the building. The door to the production floor opens. Not the side door, the main access. And you hear footsteps on the main floor. The particular footsteps of someone not wearing work boots, someone in office shoes, the hollow click of leather, sole on the red concrete that is different in texture and sound from the scuff and flat press of work boots. Schaefer. You don't stop your machine. Nobody stops. The proper protocol for a director's walkthrough is to continue at work to demonstrate normal productive activity, which is of course being demonstrated regardless because the machines are always running, but the demonstration takes on a slight additional quality of being demonstrated at in these moments. You hear Schaefer exchanging words with Hoffman near the entrance. Schaefer's voice is not loud. He's a tall man in his 40s. Schaefer, with the economy of expression that comes to people who have held authority long enough to not need volume. But in the middle hours, when the machines are settled into their runs, and there are no exceptional sounds the human voice carries, you catch fragments. Weekly total. Allocation change for November. Something about the Leipzig Kombinat delivery schedule. And then Schaefer is walking the floor, stopping at boards, running a finger down columns of numbers the way a doctor runs a finger down a patient chart looking for the anomaly, the deviation, the thing that requires discussion. He stops at your board. You see this in your peripheral vision. You don't turn your head. And you see him looking at the count. 104%. Green. He moves on without stopping, without speaking. He will stop where the numbers require stopping. He stops at Bergman's machine, and then there is a conversation that you cannot hear over the shop noise, but whose nature you can infer from the quality of its silences. You make coupling sleeve number 52. The lunch bell rings at 1:30, and the Building 2 section releases. Not a formal release. The machines wind down individually as each operator finishes their current piece, and the section empties in about 3 minutes, a gradual sigh of mechanical quieting. The silence that follows is, every day, startling. You forget in the hours of the shift that silence is possible in this building, and then the machines stop and it arrives, and it feels like something removed from the air. The canteen is in Building 6, connected to the production halls by a covered walkway that runs along the east side of the yard. The walkway is unheated. It takes 40 steps to cross. In October, 40 steps of October. In January, 40 steps that you execute at a pace that is technically walking, but that the body means as running. The canteen is warm. This, too, is the kind of warmth that hits you as something close to emotional. The GDR canteen at a medium-sized factory in 1974 is a specific institution with specific aesthetics. 12 long tables, each seating 14 people, plastic trays, metal cutlery that has been in use since the facility opened and carries in its accumulated scratches the history of every worker who has eaten here since. The walls are painted a yellow that was probably meant to be cheerful and has become, after years of canteen steam and cigarette smoke and institutional light, the particular yellow of a decision everyone has forgotten making. The smells in the canteen are boiled meat, specifically the slightly sulphurous note of beef that has been cooking for several hours, and root vegetables in a state of surrender. They were carrots and turnips at some earlier point and are now a concept. Soft, orange-grey, existing at the boundary between solid and liquid. Bread, dark rye bread. The GDR rye bread that is actually good. That is one of the things you genuinely do not have a complaint about. Dense and slightly sour and satisfying in the hand. And the ever-present underlying smell of institutional dishwasher detergent, the baseline note under everything else, which you have learned is the smell of a place where food is processed at scale, and which you now associate so completely with lunch that the smell itself produces a specific mild hunger response. You take a tray, you go to the service counter. A woman called Erica, whom you've never spoken to but whose face you know as well as any face in your life, serves you from the large metal dishes. One ladle of the meat stew. Beef today, you think, though think is doing a lot of work there, and the vegetables and a separate portion of boiled potatoes. Bread is on the table, coffee or water. You take coffee. You find a seat at the second table with Klaus and two others from Section 3. Renate, who operates a milling machine with a precision that is almost unsettling to watch, as if she and the machine have reached a personal understanding about the nature of metal, and Norbert, who is 47 and has been here longer than any of the machines he operates, and whose presence in the canteen is characterized by a steadiness that is almost geological, as if he has grown here. The food is not good. It is sufficient. These are not the same thing, and you have spent enough time in this canteen to understand them as genuinely different categories. The stew is adequate protein and fat. The potatoes are adequate carbohydrates. The rye bread is actually good. The total caloric and nutritional content is approximately what a person doing 12 hours of physical industrial work requires. This is the planned meal. This is the meal that has been nutritionally optimized for the planned worker. It doesn't taste like anything was designed for pleasure, but your body, by 1:30 in the afternoon with 4.5 hours of machining in it, receives the food with a gratitude that overrides the question of taste. You eat completely. This is something you did not do in your first month, when the food struck you as too institutional to finish. You finish it now without thinking about it, the way the body takes what it needs when it's allowed to be honest. Renate is eating and reading. She has a book, a reclaimed paperback, the yellow-covered pocket editions that are ubiquitous in the GDR, cheap enough to be universal and small enough to go in a work jacket pocket. You can't see the title from your angle. This is normal for Renate. She reads at every break, every lunch. You have once seen her reading while waiting for a machine cycle to complete, the book held in her clean hand while the dirty hand monitored the feed indicator. This is not against any rule. It is, however, slightly astonishing. Schaefer looked at Bergman's machine, you say. Norbert nods slowly, a nod that contains decades of context. The T-22 has been off for weeks. I could hear it from the next section. What's the issue? Feed servo needs calibration, maybe replacement. Could be the gearbox wear, could be the controller. Impossible to say without pulling the covers. He drinks his coffee. Bergman's been compensating by adjusting the depth of cut. You can get the numbers that way for a while. But you're putting more stress on the spindle bearing when you increase depth to compensate for feed inconsistency. So now it's not just the feed servo, it's probably the spindle bearing too. A pause. By the time parts arrive, it'll be a full rebuild. Renati turns a page without looking up. The part of that story I find interesting, she says, in the tone of someone who has decided to contribute despite not having looked up, is that Bergman has submitted 3 requisitions and filed an Eingabe to the section head and the technical director. So when it does become a full rebuild, the paperwork exists. Bergman is covered. Bergman will be told he should have pushed harder on the requisitions. Bergman will be told many things. Bergman has 3 copies of every submission date stamped by the incoming registry. A silence. The kind of silence that contains the shared recognition of something true and complex, and not fully speakable. How did your morning go? Klaus asks you. Fine. 104. Good. And yours? Fine. A pause. Werner in Dreby was called out this morning. Gone since 9. You look at Klaus. Werner in 3B. Personnel. Klaus is drinking his coffee. He drinks his coffee. He looks at the table. Personnel in this context does not mean the personnel department in the way that words usually mean the thing they say. Personnel, or more specifically being called to personnel during a shift, is a usage that carries a specific and known freight in the factory. It means a conversation, the kind of conversation that is not about your production numbers. Was it? You begin. I don't know what it was, Klaus says firmly, and in a tone that means, and I'm not going to speculate about it here, in the canteen, with 11 other people within earshot. You eat your bread. Norbert is looking at the ceiling. Renata has turned another page. The canteen noise continues around you. The sound of 300 people eating. The clatter of metal cutlery on metal trays. Conversations at every table. Someone laughing loudly near the window. The sound of the serving counter closing down. At 1:50, you stand. Carry your tray to the return window. Wash your hands at the sink in the corner. The water is warm here, which is a mercy, and the factory soap is the rough brown bar type that is very effective and smells of carbolic and feels, on your already dry hands, like an educational experience. You go back to building 2. You have 4 hours and 10 minutes left in your shift. The afternoon in a factory shifts toward a different kind of time. The morning has purpose. You're starting, building momentum. The piece count is rising, the norm is ahead of you, and you're closing the gap. The morning is directional. The afternoon has gravity. The norm is almost met. The end of the shift is visible in the piece count, getting close now, within range. And because the end is visible, the time between now and then becomes specifically weighted. Each piece in the afternoon takes, subjectively, longer than the same piece took in the morning. The hands are tireder, the eyes are tireder. The concentration required to check the 7th piece, plug gauge in, out, go, no go, requires a small additional act of will that wasn't necessary at 8 in the morning. This is not weakness. This is physics. This is 12 hours in contact with metal and noise and the specific cognitive load of precision work. This is what the body does. You've learned to work with it, to recognize when your attention is beginning to fray at the edges and to respond with a small act of conscious refocus. Look at the indicator. Check the next piece early. Clear the chip tray. A physical action. using a slightly different set of muscles which resets something. At 3:45 in the afternoon, the machine beside you stops. Not your machine, Franz's machine. The sound of it stopping is immediate and complete, and in the context of the shop floor, where everything runs continuously, a machine stopping is loud in its absence. Your hands slow on their current piece, not enough to affect the cycle, but enough for you to be aware of having slowed them. Franz is looking at the machine with the expression of a man confronted with the specific type of problem that is simple to identify and complicated to fix. His hand is on the emergency stop button, which is already depressed. He's looking at the cutting zone. You finish your current piece and load the next. You don't stop your own machine, stopping it would affect your count, but you look over. The workpiece in Franz's chuck is broken. Not dramatically. It hasn't shattered, which happens sometimes, and which is genuinely alarming, but it has separated from the turned section along a grain line, the raw material blank having had an internal defect that the incoming quality inspection missed. The broken piece is held in the tool contact zone. The cutting tool has contacted it at the wrong angle, and the tool tip has chipped. Franz looks at it for a moment. He looks at the production board. He looks at the clock. It's 3:50. He has 2 hours and 10 minutes left in his shift, a count that now stands at 83, and a machine that requires a new cutting insert, a recheck of the tool holder geometry for any secondary damage, a removal and disposal of the broken workpiece, an entry in the defect log, a report to Hoffman, and a possible hold on the current material batch pending a quality check of the raw stock. He turns and sees you looking at him. There is a long moment. It contains everything. The piece count, the afternoon, Schaefer's visit, the slow accumulation of every shift since the last time something went well without an argument. "I'll get Hoffman," you say. Franz looks at his machine, back at you. "Yeah," he says. "Yeah." Hoffman handles the broken workpiece with the efficiency of a man for whom this situation is a category that exists in his mental filing system under a known heading with a known protocol. He looks. He asks 3 questions. When did it break? Did the machine stop immediately? Did you feel any unusual vibration before the break? And writes the answers in the logbook. He examines the tool holder with a magnifying glass and a flashlight, methodical, his face completely neutral, showing neither catastrophizing nor dismissal, and pronounces the primary insert chipped, the secondary edge intact, the holder undamaged. "Batch hold on the raw stock, you ask?" Hoffman looks at the broken workpiece piece, turns it. "We'll check the next 10 from the batch. If clean, we continue. If another goes, we hold." He makes a note. "Franz, get the insert changed and run a test piece before you go back into production. Document it." He leaves. Franz begins the tool change. You go back to your machine. This is how it works. The problem was encountered. The protocol was applied. The documentation exists. Franz's count for the shift will end at 83, or perhaps, if he runs hard in the last 2 hours, at 88. He will file the defect report. The batch of raw stock will be partially checked. 2 or 3 pieces will be sacrificed to quality inspection. The coupling sleeve quota will, this day, come up slightly short by whatever Franz's deficit adds to the section total. Somewhere in a planning office in Leipzig, a number will register as slightly less than planned. The coupling sleeve, the textile machinery, the planned production of fabric, the planned quota of winter coats. The chain of consequences extends outward in theory. in practice, the plan absorbs these small variances the way the river absorbs a stone. It does in fact affect the water level, imperceptibly, temporarily, and then the river is the river again. You make coupling sleeve 78. The afternoon continues. At 4:30 you have an experience that you've had now at irregular intervals for about 4 months, and which you have never described to anyone. Not because it's unspeakable, but because you're not sure there's a vocabulary for it in this context. You're running piece 82. The machine is in its cycle. You've stepped back from the tool while it completes the finishing pass, the last light cut that brings the bore to final dimension, and you're standing with your hands at your sides, watching the indicator. The shop is fully in its afternoon rhythm. The sound is constant. The light is constant. The smell is constant. And for about 30 seconds you disappear. That's not quite the right word. You don't go anywhere. You're standing exactly there, in front of the lathe, at 4:31 in the afternoon in Building 2 of VEB Werkzeugmaschinenfabrik Karl-Marx-Stadt. You are present. You are watching the indicator. But the you who is watching is very thin. The identifying layers. I am Dieter Krantz. I am from Döbeln. I am 22. I've 7 months and 3 weeks in this factory. Have become temporarily transparent. What's left is just the watching, just the presence, just the machine going around and around in the orange light. It's not unpleasant. It's not pleasant exactly. It is simply what it is. The finishing cut completes. The machine winds down for the tool change. The indicator reads 0.02, right at tolerance, but inside it. You load the next blank. The feeling goes as quietly as it came. Piece 83. The question of Werner in 3B resolves itself by the 5 o'clock break. Or rather, it doesn't resolve, but it becomes the shape of something unresolved that everyone can see the outline of. Klaus catches you at the break room coffee thermos and says, quietly, in the way that is below the threshold of the general break room conversation, Werner filed an Ausreise Antrag. You pour your coffee, hold the cup. The coffee steam rises, the Ausreise Antrag, the exit application, the form that says, I wish to leave the German Democratic Republic. I wish to go to the Federal Republic of Germany, or Austria, or anywhere that is not here. The form existed. The process existed. It was, technically, legal to apply. The right to leave was acknowledged, theoretically, in the international agreements the GDR had signed, including the Helsinki Accords of the previous year. What the forms did not acknowledge, what no document described, was what filing one meant. You think about Werner. You have exchanged maybe 12 complete sentences with Werner in 7 months. He operates a CNC boring machine in 3B. He has a daughter in primary school. He once fixed a fault in your coolant line with a piece of copper tube bent at a precise angle that he produced from his overall pocket with the casualness of a conjurer. And you've thought about that piece of copper tube. The fact that he was carrying it, that he had thought ahead about what tools might be needed, that he had bent it with his hands at exactly the right angle, as a small illustration of a certain kind of competence that exists in working people and never gets named. When, you ask? Apparently 3 weeks ago, the call to personnel was... Klaus pauses. They're being made aware of the implications. Do they? Dieter, a pause, a look. Not here. You drink your coffee. The implications of an Ausreise Antrag in 1974 in a GDR factory were not ambiguous. The application went to the local Rat des Crises, the district council. The factory was notified. The factory's security officer, every factory of this size had one, officially a matter of routine coordination, was informed. The informal connections between the factory security office and the Ministerium für Staatssicherheit, the Stasi, were well understood by everyone who needed to understand them, and completely invisible to anyone who tried to document them officially. What happened after filing varied. Sometimes nothing happened quickly. The application was processed, which meant it sat in a system that processed it at the pace of a glacier made entirely of paperwork. Sometimes people waited for years. During those years they went to work. They operated their machines. They ate in the canteen. Their production percentage appeared on the board in the expected colour. Everything was normal, except that everything was changed. They were watched more carefully. Their colleagues were careful around them. Not hostile, not necessarily, but careful. Careful the way people are careful near something that has become, through its own action, radioactive in the social sense. Not dangerous to touch, but potentially consequential to be associated with. What happened to the daughter? What happened to the application to the Oberschule? What happened to the apartment? These were questions that everyone knew existed and nobody asked. You finish your coffee. You wash the cup. When you go back to the shop floor, you walk past the entrance to 3B. The door is partially open. You don't look in. You walk at your normal pace. In the section, Werner's machine is running. You can hear it from the corridor. The shift bell rings at 6 p.m. It doesn't so much ring as bellow. A single sustained note from the horn in the roof of the main hall that reaches into your chest and resonates there. A physical sound. The sound of a very large number of workdays concluding simultaneously in one building. You finish piece 91 and stop the machine. You look at the count, 91, against a norm of 92, one piece short, 7 months and 3 weeks, and this is the second time you've been one short at the bell. You stand for a moment with your hand on the machine housing. The housing is warm under your hand, a deep, even warmth that has accumulated over 12 hours of operation, the warmth of work done. You know this machine's thermal personality as you know the feel of your own jacket, cold at start, reaching temperature at about 40 minutes, stabilizing by hour 2, warmest in the mid-afternoon when the ambient temperature in the shop is highest, cooling toward the end of the shift as the ventilation draws heat more efficiently from the evening-cooled building. You write 91 in the log. You make a note of the final tool state. You flag the chuck jaw condition, still performing within tolerance but getting close, and add it to the open requisition note. You leave the machine to the night shift. Whoever comes next will find the logbook, the piece count, the note about the jaw. They will know everything they need to know about what happened here today in the language of the production log, which contains no adjectives, no moods, no feelings, no weather, no Werner in 3B, no conversation at the 5 o'clock break. Just the numbers and the technical notes and the signature. 91. You walk to the changing room. You open locker 147. You strip off the overalls and hang them on the hook. You put on your civilian clothes, the shirt, the collar slightly too wide, your belt. Your hands are still the colour of the factory. You wash them at the sinks, the warm water and the carbolic soap, working the soap into the creases of your knuckles, the base of your fingernails. You get most of the surface oil. The deep oil stays. The deep oil is yours now. In the mirror above the sink, Industrial metal, not glass. Polished stainless steel that gives a reflection that is recognisably you but slightly flattened, like a photograph taken in bad light. You look at yourself for a moment. 22 years old, 7 months and 3 weeks, 91 coupling sleeves today. You don't look like someone who has done 7 months and 3 weeks. You look like someone who has done exactly that, which is different. There is something in the face, not lined, not old, but settled in a way that is not the same as how you looked in the photograph on your Betriebsausweis taken on your first day. The uncertainty is gone. What replaced it is harder to name. Something that is not confidence exactly. You know too much about chuck jaws and material defects and the distance between a requisition and a replacement to be entirely confident. But something in that direction. You put your jacket on, secure the slight crooked pin above the logo. You go out into the evening. There is a place at the factory that few people go deliberately. Building 4, the old pressing hall from the original Chemnitz works, partially decommissioned, now used for parts storage on the ground floor, has an external staircase on the north face, a fire escape in the older style, metal, exposed, going up 3 floors to the roof. The staircase is technically accessible. Nobody has told you not to use it. Nobody has told you to. It is simply there, unused, leading to a place nobody thinks to be. You found it at the end of your 2nd month. You go there, rarely and always at the end of a shift, never during. This would be irregular in a way that might require explanation. And you climb the metal stairs which ring under your boots in the cold air, and you stand on the roof of Building 4. Tonight you climb. The October evening is clear. The coal smoke hangs in the city at its usual height, maybe 200 metres up, a thin grey layer visible against the darkening blue of the sky above and invisible against the city lights below. The air up here is colder than the street, colder than the factory yard, with a wind from the northwest that isn't strong but is thorough, finding every opening in your jacket, pressing the cloth against your chest. Karl-Marx-Stadt spreads out below you. It is not, as cities go, a beautiful city. You know this in the way you know it as someone who's been told about beautiful cities. Dresden, before the war, was beautiful. Also, people say with a particular reverence reserved for things that no longer exist to be verified, and can see that this is not that. It is a functional city, a rebuilt city, a city of tram lines and Plattenbau blocks, and the occasional pre-war survivor, a church here, a commercial building there, the old town hall on the Markt that managed to keep enough of its walls standing to be reconstructed rather than replaced. But in the evening, in October, with the city lights coming on, the warm orange of the sodium streets, the white rectangles of lit apartment windows, the green and red of the tram indicator boards at the stops you can just make out, it becomes something. Not beautiful exactly, but real, dense with the fact of being inhabited, being lived in, being full of people who are right now, finishing their shifts and going home and eating canteen food and reading reclaim paperbacks and watching the Sandmännchen on their small GDR television sets and listening to the news on the radio and doing all the things people do in the evenings of their lives in whatever city fate and the planned economy have placed them in. Out there to the east, somewhere in the direction of the dark, Dresden, 50 kilometres. Further east, the Polish border. South, Czechoslovakia, the mountains. North, Leipzig, and then East Berlin, and then the wall. The wall. The wall runs, you know, everyone knows, roughly 200 kilometres from where you're standing if you go in the right direction. north and northwest. You cannot see it from here. You cannot see it from anywhere you've ever been. But you know it's there the way you know the edge of the factory property is there, even in the dark, because you have been taught to know it, because the knowledge of it is present in the structure of all geography in this country, the same way the knowledge of a border changes the character of a room, even when the border is a line on a map and not a visible thing. You think about Werner. You think about the form he filed, the Ausreiseantrag. You think about what it would cost to file that form, not the money cost. There isn't a money cost or not an official one, but the cost in the currency that actually operates in this country, the cost in stability, in social membership, in the apartment in Block 7, in the locker 147, and the job that exists in it, in the production percentage that appears on the board every morning in the expected colour. You don't know what Werner's reasons are. You've never asked. You know 7 months and 3 weeks worth of Werner. The copper tube bent at the right angle, the 12 sentences, the boring machine in 3B. But you know that the filing of that form is not a casual act. Whatever Werner's reasons are, he has weighed them against everything they cost, and he has filed the form. That's a kind of decision that you haven't been confronted with yet. You don't know what kind of decision it is for you. You haven't needed to know. The wind pushes at you from the northwest, from the direction of the wall. You look at the city for another few minutes. The tram is running now. Late shift, the last couple before the evening service ends, and you can follow its progress along the Karl Marx Allee by the movement of the lit windows. A soft, bright rectangle moving steadily northeast. The church clock somewhere south of the Magistrale strikes 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The sound travels over the rooftops and arrives slightly after the strike, the way sound always does when distance is involved, arriving as a kind of echo of something that already happened. You go back down the metal stairs. The Kulturhaus Maxim Gorky, Culture House, named for the Soviet writer, as required by a policy that named significant public cultural institutions after figures whose relationship to local culture was primarily geographical in the sense that they were in the same hemisphere, sits 4 streets north of the factory, in a building that was a cinema in the 1930s and still bears the proportions of that purpose. A tall entrance hall, wide inner doors, rooms sized for audiences. On Thursday evenings, the Section 2 Brigade, your brigade, meets here. The brigade meeting is a required element of socialist work life. The brigade is not just a production unit. It is, in theory, a social unit, a collective that takes responsibility for its members' ideological development and cultural well-being, as well as their production numbers. The brigade keeps a brigade buch, a brigade journal, bound, illustrated, recording the brigade's achievements and social events, and improvement commitments, and general trajectory as a collective body within the larger body of the socialist enterprise. The journal is a serious object. The obligation to maintain it is genuinely taken seriously by some people, particularly the brigade secretary, a woman named Gertrude who has been the brigade secretary for 11 years, and who approaches the brigade bush with the dedication of someone writing a document she believes will be read. She probably will be right. These journals were in fact read, filed, evaluated and used as evidence of a brigade's cultural functioning. Gertrude is not wrong to take it seriously. The brigade meetings are, in practice, 2 things simultaneously. They are the thing they officially are, and they are what they actually are. What they officially are, a collective review of production targets, a discussion of improvement initiatives, a reading from the Brigade, an update on the 5-year plan progress, occasionally a cultural component, a reading, a film, a presentation on a historical or scientific topic. What they actually are. 40 minutes in a warm room with chairs and bad coffee, which is 40 minutes in a warm room that isn't the factory and isn't the apartment, and in which the conversation that happens around the official content is the actual content. Tonight the official portion is a review of the section's October numbers and a presentation by Hoffman on a proposed efficiency measure for the setup time on the Model RT lathes, your lathe type, which, he estimates, could be reduced by 4 minutes per setup by reorganizing the tool storage carousel. This would, calculated over 12 operators running 2 setups per shift across 30 days, produce a measurable aggregate improvement. Hoffman presents this with slides. He has made the slides himself, hand-lettered on cardstock, held up one at a time with the particular care of someone for whom the preparation of the slides was itself a significant act of labour, and to whom the dismissal of the slides would be, in a quiet way, something to notice. The numbers are correct. The time saving is real. The reorganization of the tool carousel requires the approval of the technical director and an update to the work instruction binder, which requires approval from the standards office, which requires a submission form. Timeline? Asks Klaus. Realistically, says Hoffman, with the carefully modulated realism of someone who has submitted things before, if we get the form in this week, we might have approval by Q1. Q1 means January, February or March. By Q1, says Renate, not looking up from the Reclam paperback she's continuing to read below the level of the table. The setup time issue will have been solved another way, or gotten worse and become an emergency. A silence. Probably both, says Norbert. Hoffman puts down his current cardstock slide. He's a man who does not allow himself visible frustration in group settings, but there is a quality to the putting down of the slide that contains information. We file the form, he says, that's what we do, and the thing is, he's right. That is in fact what you do, because the alternative, not filing the form, not working within the process, not accepting the timeline, is not actually an alternative that exists. The form is the form. The process is the process. The Q1 timeline is the Q1 timeline. Hoffman files the form. The setup time continues to be 4 minutes longer than it needs to be. The coupling sleeves continue to be made. The number on the board continues to be green or not green. And when it's not green, there are conversations. This is the shape of the thing. The official portion concludes. Gertrude reads from the Brigadebuch, which she's updated to include the section's achievement of the quarterly target and a note about the section's entry in the socialist competition, a system by which brigades formally competed against each other for production excellence and received recognition, pennants, sometimes material rewards. The Section 2 Brigade is currently in 2nd place in its category. Second, says Franz from the back row, we improved from 3rd. Still 2nd. 2nd is excellent performance, says Hoffman. A pause. 2nd, Franz says again, in exactly the same tone. And this is, you've noticed, one of the things about Franz. He makes his points at exactly the frequency required to be heard, and at exactly the volume below the threshold of a formal disciplinary issue. This is a calibration that you suspect requires more deliberate thought than it looks like. Franz is not stupid. Franz operates his machine at 89% and makes his points at a specific volume. These are related choices. After the official portion, the coffee comes out, and the room changes. The chairs turn slightly. The conversations subdivide. The brigade meeting becomes what it is. 40 people who have spent the day in the same building dispersed now into their actual conversation clusters, the ones that have nothing to do with the production board. Hoffman stays near the front and speaks to Gertrude about the Brigade book entries. Renate goes immediately to the window with her reclaimed paperback and a cup of coffee, and successfully becomes invisible by the simple method of being clearly unavailable. The older workers, Helmut, Norbert, a few others, gather near the radiator in the particular way of people whose primary requirement from an evening gathering is warmth and the absence of anything requiring response. And you end up near the back of the room with Klaus and a young man named Peter, who came to the factory 3 months after you did and is therefore still in the phase of having opinions about everything, which is exhausting and also familiar because you remember having opinions about everything, and it now feels like a long time ago. Peter is 20. He is from Erfurt. He has strong views about the production quota system's effect on innovation incentives, which he's expressed 4 times in the past 3 months in exactly the way someone expresses views that they know are correct and that they have not yet learned to be careful about. Werner, Peter says. Klaus looks at Peter in the specific way of someone trying to communicate an enormous amount of information in a single glance. Peter is 20. He does not receive the information. I'm just saying everybody knows. I'm not saying anything that... Peter, Klaus says. A pause. What I'm saying, Peter says more quietly now, the volume having registered, is that it seems like a perfectly legitimate process that he's engaged with, and the response seems, Peter. Peter drinks his coffee. Silence. You think about Werner's daughter, primary school, the application to the Oberschule that Werner's daughter would be applying to in 4 years, or 3, or 5, and that would note on her file the application status of her father, and that would be inclined to consider this information relevant to the question of whether this particular child should be given access to an academic secondary education. The implications are the implications. You don't say this to Peter, because saying it to Peter in this room is not where you say this. There's a place you say this, and it is not the Kulturhaus Maxim Gorky on a Thursday Brigade evening. Where you say it, if you say it at all, is in the space between sleeping and waking, in the 4:45 morning dark of Locker 147's world, where the thoughts that have no proper outlet go, where they circulate, where they accumulate like chips in the tray below the cutting zone, evidence of work done, a record of material removed, matter that has to be cleared out regularly before it gets in the way of what you're trying to make. Second place is still quite good, you say to Peter. We improved from third. Peter looks at you. Yeah, he says eventually. Yeah, okay. At 9 in the evening, the Kulturhaus clears. People have early mornings. Some have night shift starting in a few hours. The building's heating has been declining since 8, and the chairs near the wall are getting cold. You walk home with Klaus, your flatmate Klaus, not Section 3 Klaus, who lives in a different direction. The streets are quiet now, the late October evening having settled into itself. A few people walking quickly, the tram finished, the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere in the direction of the new residential block going up on the northwest edge of the Wohngebiet. You walk past the Nischel again. In the sodium light, the 40 tons of bronze look different than in the morning dark. Warmer, more specific, the texture of the bronze surface visible in ways that the dawn doesn't show. The face is large enough that walking past it means looking at it from below, from the angle of the small looking at the enormous, which is probably the point. You ever think about it? You ask Klaus, not Werner, not specifically, just it. Klaus is quiet for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, breath visible in the cold air. I think about a lot of things, he says. I think about a lot of things very carefully. This is a complete answer. It says what it says, and also says everything around what it says, and you know what everything around it is. Yeah, you say. You did 91 today? Yeah. Still green. Still green. You walk the last 2 blocks in silence. The silence is comfortable. It is the silence of 2 people who understand each other's economy with words and have decided it is sufficient. At the building door, Klaus does the combination on the lock. It's also a 3-digit combination, the building's master, which everyone in the block knows because someone wrote it on the wall inside the stairwell in pencil approximately 10 years ago, and it has never been changed. The door opens. The cold stairwell air meets the slightly warmer corridor air in a brief atmospheric disagreement. The broken light on the 2nd floor landing. Your hand on the railing, cold metal slightly sticky with the cold. In the apartment, the smell of Klaus's evening food. He's been home earlier than you, he works an earlier shift. A fried egg and bread, the smell still present in the main room. His chessboard is on the table, black in a position of mild disadvantage, white with a passed pawn on the queen side. He's been working on this game for several evenings. You don't know who wins, because you don't know chess well enough to know, but you know it looks like it matters to him. You make tea, not coffee. Too late for coffee. You've learned this about yourself in 8 months of early mornings. Tea from the supply your mother sends in packets with notes attached. This is the chamomile from the garden. This is the peppermint from the back of the plot grown well this year. The smell of the chamomile opening in hot water is completely different from the factory smell, completely different from the Kulturhaus smell, completely different from October in Karl Marx Stadt in a way that is almost startling. It smells like your mother's garden in Dubeln. It smells like something from before this, from the life before the letter of assignment and the Plattenbau and the coupling sleeves. You sit at the table with the tea and do not think about the chessboard. You look at the window, which reflects the room at you in dark glass, the yellow overhead light, the table, yourself, the cup. A reflection in which everything is reversed. Left where there was right, right where there was left. The same room, the mirror room. You are on reflection, all right. This is not nothing. This is, in fact, something. 7 months and 3 weeks is enough time to know whether you are, on balance, all right. You're sleeping, you're eating, you're making roughly the norm most days. You have a flatmate who plays chess against himself and never mentions the photograph inside his wardrobe door. And this is a form of privacy that you have come to understand as a form of respect. You have a Meister who doesn't shout. You have a machine that you understand well enough that its anomalies speak to you before they become failures. You have not been called to personnel. You're not Werner in 3B. You're not Peter, who has opinions at the volume above the threshold. You're not Franz, who makes 89% as a form of communication with the system. You are Dieter Krantz, 91/92 today, 2nd place in the section's socialist competition, resident of Block 7, Apartment 4, Karl Marx Stadt, GDR, October 1974. It's not the life you imagined from Dubeln. But you didn't know in Dubeln what life actually cost in materials and labour and the specific expertise required to live in a particular place. You know more now. The knowing is the thing the city gives you, the way the lathe gives you the coupling sleeve. What you have at the end is not the blank you started with, but something worked and shaped and within tolerance. The tea is warm. The radiator is producing its faint metallic heat. Outside, Karl Marx Stadt is quieter at 9 in the evening than it is at 5 in the morning. The morning has direction, is going somewhere, makes the sounds of motion. The evening has arrived, is still, makes the sounds of maintenance and subsidence and the last things finishing up. Someone in the block above you is watching television. The thin, muffled sound of the GDR evening news filters through the ceiling. You can't hear the words, just the rhythm of speech, the professional cadence of the Tagesschau reader, measured and continuous and ending with a rising note on every third sentence that turns out to be the same rising note repeated in a pattern, which you've been hearing for 8 months through the ceiling, and which is as much a part of this apartment soundscape as the floor creak on the landing or the water in the pipes. Klaus comes in from wherever he's been, the bathroom, the end of the hallway, somewhere in the small geography of the apartment, and stops at the doorway. He looks at you with the chessboard between you on the table. "I made a mistake," he says. He means the chess. "Can you fix it?" He looks at the board, the black pieces in their mild disadvantage, the white past pawn. "No," he says, "but I can make it cost more to exploit." He sits down. He moves a piece. He looks at it. You drink your tea. You go to bed at 10:30. The alarm is set for 4:45, 6 hours and 15 minutes. The room is cold. The blanket is the blanket. The ceiling is the ceiling with the water stain in the corner that will not be reported by Tuesday or Thursday morning. Outside, Karl Marx Stadt, breathing. The last tram's done now. The street's empty. The district heating system working overnight to warm the water that will arrive in the radiators in November, after the schedule says November, not before. The Nischel standing 40 tons of bronze in the dark, looking northwest. Patient, made to last. Tomorrow the alarm will go at 4:45. You'll get up. You'll make the ersatz coffee. You'll put on the overalls and the too-wide collar shirt and the belt. You'll walk through the October cold to the factory gate and show Gerald your pass, which he will check although he knows your face, because that is the correct procedure, and the correct procedure is what you do. You'll sign into Rudiger's logbook. You'll check the chuck jaw, wearing still flagged, requisition still pending. You'll load the first blank. You'll make coupling sleeve number 1. Then number 2, then number 3. The machine turning, the tool cutting, the coolant flowing, the chip curling away from the workpiece in its particular helix when the feed rate and the speed are right, and the material cooperates, and everything in this small universe of the cutting zone is working as it should. 92 to make, or 91 if the jaw gives you trouble, or 93 if you push, if the blanks are clean and the inserts are good and the machine gives you one of those shifts where everything is slightly more right than usual, slightly more inside the tolerance of the possible. You've been making coupling sleeves for 7 months and 3 weeks. You will make them for how long? The letter of assignment said 2 years, with the option to apply for extension or transfer, or, if you demonstrate the right qualities in the right ways, for promotion to a different role. 2 years means 16 months more, approximately. 16 months. 16 months of coupling sleeves means, at the nominal norm, approximately 9,500 more coupling sleeves, added to the 8,327 you've already made, which means your hands will have touched and shaped and measured and verified approximately 18,000 coupling sleeves by the time you leave this machine. 18,000 flanged coupling sleeves, 17 millimeters internal diameter, tolerance 0.02 millimeter. Somewhere in Leipzig there are textile machines that run because of these parts. Somewhere in this country there is fabric being woven in those machines. Somewhere there are people wearing things made of that fabric, and they don't know the name of the factory that made the machine parts, and they don't know the name of the operator at Lathe RT23 in Building 2, and they never will. And this is, you've thought about this, in the middle hours, in the factory quiet that isn't quite quiet. This is actually fine. This is the nature of things made at scale, in a planned economy or any economy. The part disappears into the function disappears into the use is invisible. You made the thing works. Somewhere, the thing works. That's enough to be enough. The city changes with the seasons. This is the thing about living in a place rather than visiting it. You accumulate its changes. You become, whether you want to or not, a repository for what this city is like across time. November arrives with the heating. Genuinely. One morning the radiator is cold, and the next morning, November 1st, it is warm, and the warmth has a different quality than October's accidental warmth. It is official warmth, scheduled warmth, the warmth of an institution having made a decision, and it fills the apartment in a way that makes you realize how cold you had been without completely registering it. November also arrives with fog. The brown, coal fog settles into the city and stays for days at a time. A grey-yellow presence that changes the light from sodium orange to something thicker, more diffuse, so that the street lamps have halos, and the factory across the yard is a vague, enormous presence rather than a defined shape. Walking to work in November fog is like walking through something that hasn't made up its mind about being solid. December brings the first snow, and with the first snow, something that is completely irrational happens in your body. You feel something like joy. Not because snow makes things easier. It doesn't. It makes everything more difficult. The walk to the factory is now a cold, wet negotiation between boots and ice. But because snow covers things, the cracked parking lot concrete, the mud between the building bases, the bare ground around the trees on the boulevard that has looked like defeat since October. Under the snow, everything becomes simple and white, and for a few days, before the snow turns grey with coal soot, you remember what clean looks like. You spend Christmas, December 25th, which in the GDR is the first day of the Weihnachtsurlaub, the factory holiday, in Döbeln with your parents. You take the train from Karl-Marx-Stadt, 2 hours through a landscape that is white and brown and occasionally red brick and chimney smoking, in the particular way of small Saxon towns in December, and you arrive at your parents' house and your mother opens the door and the smell of it. Roasting meat and pine branches and the particular indefinable smell of the house you grew up in, which isn't a smell you can name but which is so deeply established in your neurology that it arrives as something like a physical blow of recognition, makes you stand in the doorway for a moment before you can go in. Your father asks about the factory. He was a toolmaker himself before his back, and he asks the questions of a man who knows the environment. How's the equipment? How's the section head? Are the materials up to spec? What's the section standing in the competition? You answer correctly, and he listens with the particular attention of a man receiving verified intelligence. Your mother feeds you things you have not eaten in 7 months. She watches you eat them in the way that mothers watch and doesn't say anything about watching. You sleep in your old room, in your old bed, under your old ceiling for 2 nights. On the second night, before you fall asleep, you realize that you have stopped being able to tell which body in which bed is the real one. The Dublin body in the Dublin bed, or the Karl Marx Stadt body in the Karl Marx Stadt bed. They're the same body. They're different people inhabiting it at different times. You take the train back on December 27th. The factory resumes on January 2nd. January is the real East German winter, and it is not polite about it. The temperature drops to -18 on the coldest night. The lathe's hydraulic fluid thickens in the cold, and the machine is slow to start on Monday mornings until the fluid warms and flows freely, and the first 20 pieces of a Monday shift have a slightly less precise quality that you've learned to compensate for by running a slightly slower feed rate until the machine has been running for 40 minutes and is fully warm. This is not in the work instruction. This is the knowledge that lives between the work instruction and the actual machine, the knowledge that belongs to the operator rather than the documentation. Your hands crack in January. The dry cold and the cutting fluid and the industrial soap combine to produce splits in the skin at the knuckles, small but specific, that sting sharply when the cutting fluid gets in them, which it does regularly, because the cutting fluid goes everywhere within a certain radius of the cutting zone, and no glove is completely impermeable. You put Vaseline on them at night. This helps. By February they're healing. Your mother sends more wool socks. Werner's application is rejected in February. This is also information that travels in the specific way that things travel in a factory. Without any official announcement, without any formal channel, in fragments and implications and the changed behavior of people who know something you don't yet know and are deciding how to handle the knowing. What you eventually learn from Klaus in the changing room after the evening shift, in the low register conversation of that specific location, is that Werner's Ausreissantrag was processed and denied on the basis that the departure of workers with his technical qualifications was not in the interest of the enterprise. This is the standard denial. It is the standard form letter. The application has been officially received, officially processed, officially declined. Werner will continue to report to Building 3B. Werner will continue to operate the boring machine. Werner's daughter will continue to attend primary school. The Oberschule application is Werner's business, and whatever consideration the Oberschule gives to the father's file is the Oberschule's business, and these are connected things in ways that are understood and not discussed. You think about the copper tube bent at the right angle, the 12 sentences over 7 months, the competence in Werner's hands. You go to your machine, you load the first blank, you run the program, the chuck spins, the tool engages, the coupling sleeve begins. Spring comes in stages, the way spring always comes when you're paying attention to it from a factory window in a city that has been grey since October. First, the light changes, not the temperature. The temperature changes later. But one morning in late February, the quality of the morning light when you leave the apartment is different. Not light exactly, not warm, but specifically, not dark anymore. The dark has been retreating by 2 minutes a day since January, and for weeks it was a statistical change rather than a felt one, and then suddenly it's felt. You're leaving the apartment in something that is, if not morning, at least the credible suggestion of morning. Then the frost on the factory yard concrete starts to not form overnight. You notice this because you've been noticing the frost for 4 months, the white crunch of it under your boots, the way it makes the cracked lot look briefly decorative. And then one Wednesday morning it isn't there, and the lack of it is as specific as its presence. Then the tram driver opens his window, and the air that comes through the open window is cold but not hostile, and this is, among the small pleasures available to someone going to a 6 a.m. factory shift on a Tuesday in early March, a genuine small pleasure. Then one morning, in the 3-centimetre gap between the building base and the concrete of the sidewalk, on the walk to the factory gate, you see something green. Not grey-green, not the institutional paint green, not the green of the Brigade poster in the break room. Green. The specific, impossible colour of something alive choosing to be alive, right there in the crack between the building and the earth, having spent months underground in the cold and the dark, doing whatever it is things do when they're waiting to be spring. You stop walking. You look at it for a moment. Behind you, someone, one of the other early shift workers from a different block, someone you've passed without speaking for months, nearly walks into you, catches themselves, makes a sound. Sorry, you say. He looks down at what you're looking at, the green thing in the crack. He nods once, the 5 a.m. working man's nod. Sufficient, and you both keep walking. April. The Brigade Boosh records the Brigade's first place finish in the quarter's socialist competition. A pennant is awarded, a red cloth triangle with gold fringe, which is hung by Gertrude on the wall of the section office with the care of someone hanging something that matters. There's a small ceremony, brief, after the shift in the break room, with the actual coffee and a plate of keksi, the German cookies that are not fancy but are present, which is the requirement. Hoffman makes a short speech. He thanks the section. He says the section's improvement in set-up efficiency, the Q1 approval of his tool carousel reorganisation came through in late March, 7 weeks after Q1 technically began, contributed measurably to the improvement. He thanks Renate for her quality documentation work, which has been cited by the Quality Office as a model for the section. He thanks several individuals by name for specific contributions. He doesn't thank you. You're not sure why you notice this. You're not sure what you expected to notice, except that you notice it. After the ceremony, as people are leaving, Hoffman stops beside you at the door. He's looking at the pennant on the wall. "First year done in May," he says. "Yes, Meister." Your numbers have been consistent. This is a complete sentence in the vocabulary of Meister Hoffman's assessment. It is, in this vocabulary, significant. "Thank you, Meister." He looks at you for a moment. The functional face, the grey hair, the hands that are permanently the colour of the workshop. "You ask good questions," he says, "about the machines, about why things work the way they do, not just how they work. You don't know what to say to this. Most people at your stage just want to know how. The why takes longer." He pauses. "Come and talk to me at the end of the month. There's a training program at the Technische Schule. Evenings and weekends, 18 months. Machine maintenance and diagnostics. If you're interested." He leaves. You stand in the doorway of the break room for a moment, looking at the pennant. Red cloth, gold fringe. It is a small, handsome thing. May. 1 year. 1 year of coupling sleeves, of building 2, of Mr. Hoffman and Rudiger's logbook, and the 5-minute morning handover. 1 year of Franz at 89%. 1 year of the norm and the board and the green percentage and the occasional red. 1 year of the canteen's boiled beef and adequate carbohydrates. 1 year of the Kulturhaus and Brigade meetings and Gertrude and the Brigadebuch. 1 year of the alarm at 4:45. 1 year of the walk to the factory in the dark with the Nischel watching from the boulevard. You've made by your own count just over 10,000 coupling sleeves. The exact number is in the logbook. You haven't actually looked it up. You know it's approximately 10,000 because you know the norm and you know your average and the math isn't complicated. 10,000 small flanged cylinders, 17 millimeters inside, 0.02 tolerance. Gone to Leipzig. Gone into the textile machinery. Gone into the fabric. Gone into the coats. You have not held any of those coats. You have not been to Leipzig. You do not know the name of the people in the factory who assembled the machines. You know the diameter of the bore and the tolerance and the material grade and what a good cutting insert sounds like against this specific steel. That is your knowledge. It is complete within its limits, and it is real. The day you apply for the Technische Schule evening program, a Tuesday in late May at the personnel office, the woman at the window takes your application form, stamps it, the sound of the stamp, the specific weight of that moment, and puts it in the incoming tray. Processing time, you ask? She looks up. She has been processing applications at this window since before you were assigned to this city. 4 to 6 weeks, she says. Thank you. You leave. It's warm outside for the first time since October in a way that is not just slightly warmer than freezing, but actually warm, properly warm. The May warmth that makes Karl-Marx-Stadt briefly a city where someone might choose to be, rather than a city where someone has been assigned. You walk back to the factory, past the Nischel, the 40 tons of bronze looking northwest, as always, patient as always, and across the cracked parking lot to the gate. Gerald is at his post. You show your pass. He checks it. You go in. Up to Building 2. Down the aisle to lathe RT23. You load the first blank of the afternoon setup. Tighten the chuck. You feel the jaw, the one that's been wearing, still performing within tolerance but getting closer to the line. The requisition is still pending, has been pending for 3 months. You feel the grab of the chuck on the workpiece, the mechanical certainty of it, 3 jaws coming to bear on the cold steel cylinder from 3 directions equally, and holding it still for what's about to happen to it. You lower the tool, set the position, check the indicator, 0.00. Press start. The machine spins up, the sound deepens, the tool engages, the cutting fluid arcs and the smell arrives, acrid, aqueous, the smell that is now your smell, the smell that is in your hands that soap can't fully reach. The coupling sleeve begins. There is a particular quality to physical exhaustion at the end of a long shift that is different from any other kind of tiredness. It's not the exhaustion of mental work. That is a dull, horizontal weight behind the eyes that wants you to sit down and close them. Physical exhaustion is more specific. It lives in particular places. The lower back, which has been upright and slightly forward-leaning for 12 hours. The right forearm, which does the precise work of the chuck key and the plug gauge, and the various small adjustments that, repeated several hundred times, add up to a forearm that has opinions about its situation. The shoulders, which have been maintaining the particular supported but not resting posture of someone working at a standing machine. The exhaustion is real and complete, and there is something in it, when it arrives at the end of the shift, that is not unpleasant. It is the exhaustion of having done something, of having spent the body on something that had a number attached to it, and the number's on the board and the number is green. 92 today. Exactly 92. Norm met. Not 104, not 91, 92. 100%. The precise meeting of the calculation's expectation by the actual performance of actual hands on an actual machine for 12 actual hours. There's something in that number, today, that feels specific, like a signature, like a statement, like, I know what this requires and I have provided exactly what it requires, and this is the number, and it is correct, and tomorrow there will be another number, and it will also be correct because that is what I do now, here, in this place, in this year. Dieter Kranz, RT23, VAB Werkzeugmaschinenfabrik Karl-Marx-Stadt, May 1975. You sign the logbook. You go to the changing room. The walk home at the end of a May shift is different from the walk to work at the beginning of an October shift, in all the ways that May and October differ, and in one way that is not about the season. You have been here a year. The city is the same city, the tram tracks in the same places, the Nischel on its granite plinth at the same coordinates, the Plattenbau blocks, yours, and the ones around yours, and the ones being built to the north that you can see the crane of from the factory roof, in their assigned places, grey and specific and populated by specific people, doing specific things in specific amounts of space. But you are a year different. You know the loose paving stone in front of the pharmacy that catches the edge of your boot if you're not paying attention, and you're always paying attention now. You know which window on block 11 belongs to the woman who always has her light on until midnight, and who you've decided, without evidence, is a writer, because the light has a specific quality of intentionality that reading has, and nothing else has at that hour. You know that the dog you hear sometimes in the early morning from the building 2 streets over has a different bark in the cold, sharper, more clipped, than in the warm. You know these things the way you know the feel of a well-worn chuck key, the way you know what 91% sounds like versus 93% on the machine. You know them because you've been here, specifically here, for long enough. The Nischel as you pass it. You look up. You always look up at this point, every morning going, every evening coming back. You've looked at this face, you calculate. Something over 700 times now. You know the shadows on it. You know the particular way the sodium light catches the cheekbones in November, and the brow in winter, and the jaw in summer. You know the inscription in several languages at the base. You still don't know what expression the face is wearing, visionary or unimpressed, both or neither. Maybe it's just a face. 40 tons of bronze shaped into the face of a man who had ideas that other men turned into a country, and the country had among its components a factory that made coupling sleeves, and a section that came in second and then first in the socialist competition, and a meister with a functional face who asked a young man from Dubeln whether he was interested in an evening training program. Maybe the expression doesn't matter. Maybe expressions are what we read onto things because things don't have the faces we give them. Or maybe it's looking at something real, something at the right distance to be seen clearly, something northwest. You don't know. You keep walking. Block 7, 4th floor, apartment, the key, the smell of the apartment, Klaus's evening food, the faint residue of it, the chemical warmth of the district heating, which has been working since November and will work until April comes back and the schedule says April. Your shoes off at the door, the socks on the cold linoleum, the light switch, the click of the GDR light switch, which has a specific quality, a slightly soft engagement, different from the harder click you've heard in photographs of places that are not the GDR. Different in the way that small things are different when they're produced in parallel with other places but not in conversation with them. The chair, the cup, the tea, your mother's chamomile opened into hot water, the smell of the Dubeln garden arriving in her Karl-Marx-Stadt kitchen, the improbable precision of smell across space and time, your hands around the cup, your hands that are 22 years old and 1 year of factory, your hands that have done 10,000 coupling sleeves and cleared the chip tray and tightened the chuck key and felt the specific resistance of a worn jaw. Your hands that have the oil in the creases of the knuckles that soap can't reach. Your hands that bent the work instruction binder and signed Rudiger's logbook and wrote 91 and 92 and 104 into the production record daily for a year. Your hands that are yours, that are made of here now, made of this year, made of this city and this machine and this work. The tea cools slowly in the cup. Outside, Karl-Marx-Stadt is doing what Karl-Marx-Stadt does in the evening in May, which is slightly more alive than in February, slightly more window open, slightly more sounds floating up from the street. A radio somewhere, playing. Faintly, you can't make out the song. Voices from below. The sound of a child somewhere in the block, running in a corridor, the light footsteps of someone under 10 who hasn't yet learned to be quiet in a building where the walls are thin. Klaus is in his room. You can hear very faintly the small sound of the chess pieces on the magnetic board, a piece being lifted, a piece set down, a piece being reconsidered, picked up, returned to its original position or moved to a new one. The small deliberate sounds of a person working through a problem that has no urgency and considerable depth. You think about the training program, 18 months, evenings and weekends, machine maintenance and diagnostics, the why of why the chuck jaw wears, the why of the misfeed in 3B's T22, the why of the hydraulic fluid in the January cold. All the why that you've been accumulating in the space between the work instruction and the actual machine, the knowledge that belongs to the operator rather than the documentation, turned into something formal, something with a certificate at the end. You think about Werner, about the copper tube bent at the right angle in the overall pocket, the kind of thought-ahead preparation that is invisible and completely real. You think about Franz, at 89% making his point at exactly the volume below the threshold. You think about Renate with her reclam paperback, becoming invisible at the window, managing to be entirely present and entirely separate at the same time. You think about Hoffman. Come talk to me at the end of the month. The precise economy of that. You think about the view from the factory roof, the tram moving northeast along the Magistrale, a slow bright rectangle in the evening city, the church clock striking 7, the sound arriving after the fact, an echo of what already happened. The city gets quieter. This is the last sound, every night. The city getting quieter, not silent. Karl-Marx-Stadt doesn't go silent. The district heating hums, the industrial infrastructure runs overnight. There's always a dog somewhere, always someone with a light on, but quieter. The evening's occupation by living people giving way to the overnight occupation by systems. The oil in the factory's hydraulics is cooling slightly. The cutting fluid in the sumps is settling. The machines are standing in the dark of Building 2, cool now after the shift's heat. The metal contracted slightly in the night air, the cutting inserts cold and sharp in their holders, ready for tomorrow. The coupling sleeves are in their trays, 92 of them, going to Leipzig, going into the machines, going into the fabric, gone. The blank that becomes the part that disappears into the function invisible, the maker known to no one. That's enough. You are warm enough. fed enough, safe enough. You have a chair and a cup and a window that shows you the city at night, which is not a beautiful city but is specific and full and real. You have a flatmate who plays chess against himself with the seriousness of someone for whom the game matters. You have a machine that you understand. You have a meister who says, "Come talk to me in the way that means something." You have the work. You have the hands. You have the year. The teacup is empty now. You set it on the table. You look at the window, at the reflected room reversed in the dark glass. Left where right was, right where left was. The same room, the mirror version, the version that looks almost identical and contains everything backward. You're tired in all the right places. The body knows this. The lower back, the right forearm, the shoulders. You get up, rinse the cup, set it upside down on the rack, turn off the light. Your room, the bed. The thin blanket that is warmer in May than it was in October, being the same blanket but encountered at a different temperature, the same blanket but carrying a different meaning in the warmth, the same blanket but yours. You close your eyes, the city is still out there, running its systems, cycling its district heating, moving toward whatever the night is moving toward, which is the morning, which is always the morning, which is the alarm at 4:45 with its particular small violence. But that's tomorrow. Right now there is just this. The warm room, the dark, the sounds of the building settling into its overnight form, the sound through the wall of a chess piece being placed with deliberate quiet on a magnetic board, the sound of someone deciding something, the sound of someone who's made a mistake and is working out what it costs to exploit it. Some things don't change. The particular exhaustion of a day of work in a body that has worked itself exactly to its limit and is now, in the warmth and the dark, releasing, giving up the effort of the day, returning the tension of maintained posture and sustained attention to the place where tensions go when they're done. Your hands are open on the blanket, the oil in the creases, the small white scar at the base of the left thumb fading now, barely there, the hands of someone who has made things, real things, small things, things that work inside larger things, that work inside a system too large to see from any single point within it, but real. Let the city run its systems. Let the machines stand in Building 2 in the dark, cooling, waiting. Let the morning come when it comes, and it will come. It always comes. The alarm at 4:45 with its small determined violence, and you'll find your hand reaching for it without deciding to, without needing to decide, because this is what the body knows now. Because the body is 7 months and 3 weeks, and then a year and counting, because the body has learned this place, these rhythms, this particular form of a life. Let it come. Let sleep come the way it comes now, quickly, the way it comes to someone who has been genuinely used, genuinely expended, genuinely present in a 12-hour shift in Building 2 of VEB Werkzeugmaschinenfabrik Karl-Marx-Stadt, in the October becoming November, becoming December, becoming January, becoming spring, becoming May of 1974 into 1975. Let the hands rest. Let the back rest. Let the mind, which has been tracking the norm all day, let it stop tracking. 92. Today. Good enough. Tomorrow's count begins at 0, always begins at 0, and 0 is not a failure. 0 is the beginning. 0 is the blank in the tray before anything's been done to it. 0 is the potential before it becomes the part. You are the operator. The blank is the day. The day is waiting, but not yet. Not now. Now is the dark and the warm and the quiet. Now is the end. Now is rest, which you have earned completely, specifically in the way that physical work earns rest, not a metaphor, not a sentiment, but the actual earned thing, the body's accounting arriving at zero, the debt of the day paid in full. The city is out there, the Nishal is out there, 40 tons of bronze, looking at whatever it looks at in the dark. The factory is out there cooling. The coupling sleeves are out there in their trays on their way to wherever they go. You are here, in this bed, in this room, in this city, in this particular life, in this particular year, in this particular country that will not exist in 50 years but which exists completely now, exists with full conviction and full weight, and the full smell of brown coal and cutting fluid and Azat's coffee and chamomile from the Dubeln garden. It exists. You exist inside it. You're making something. That's enough. That's more than enough. Sleep. Good night.